Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne, and today with my guest, Tiffany Toombs. Tiffany is an international speaker and expert on rewiring the mind for success and tapping into personal potential. For over 20 years, Tiffany has educated and transformed the lives of people across the world. She specializes in teaching people how to stop the patterns of self-sabotage, trauma, limiting beliefs, and burnout. And she's also the author of Stop Being a Selfish Biatch, a comprehensive guide to living your best life through radical self-love. And she's the host of the podcast, Motherhood Unfiltered. Pretty impressive. So thank you, first of all, for joining me today. I'm excited to get to talk to you about these topics.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Before we dig in, can you give me some background and let us know how you got into all of this work? Because typically I find it's a very windy path for people and usually starts with some kind of struggle that they're going through. So I'm interested to share your story and how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually began my career in the health and fitness industry thinking that, I would be a personal trainer helping people rehab their physical injuries for the rest of my life. I actually remember telling people, I can't imagine doing anything else with my life. And then I went through my own personal healing journey. And I realized that what I had experienced as a child, I came to realize during that journey that I had been abused by my stepmom. And for a lot of people, they're like, well, what do you mean you came to realize that? And I think when it comes to like carrying emotional baggage, trauma, things like that, that we judge ourselves compared to what we know other people have been through. And so for me, my stepmom, who's actually a domestic violence survivor, she locked me in closets. She burned me with curling irons. There was numerous times where she threatened to either leave me on the side of the road, telling me that a stranger would come and kill me, or that she would kidnap me and I would never see my family again. But because it was only every other weekend, and because it stopped when I was 10, I didn't see them anymore after I was 10 because they moved. And I didn't have the black and blue bruises, right? I wasn't being sexually abused, that I convinced myself that it wasn't a big deal. And I hid it from everybody. I didn't talk about it with anybody until I started seeing a therapist in my late 20s. And that was really when I realized that even though like logically I knew that it wasn't normal for a child to be brought up that way, it was my normal. And so I had justified it to myself. And so, as I said, I went to a therapist and that gave me the understanding that I had been abused, but it didn't really go further than that for me. And then I did the rah-rah motivational events. I hired life coach after life coach. And I just kept hearing like, you can't change the past. You just need to move on and focus on the future. And that kind of took me through realizing like that there had to be another way. And so I kind of happened to find hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. And that led me into a deep study on understanding the nervous system, how the nervous system becomes so dysregulated, whether we have trauma, whether we just have chaotic childhoods, if we're raised to be a people pleaser or perfectionist, all of this dysregulates our nervous system. And that impacts how we show up in every area of our life moving forward. And so that's when I realized that I had a gift for helping people heal these pieces, but also I'm super passionate about it because I didn't want anybody to ever have to feel the stuckness that I felt.
Well, I'm certainly sorry you went through all that. You made me think of a few things. One is that I think we do have a tendency to minimize. We minimize what happens to us. And for whatever reason, we sort of try to make it more normal. And then the second thing, I think it's probably important to say, because I've recently learned this, I wasn't really thinking of it or aware of it, is that even if we don't remember an experience of trauma, our body can remember the experience and classify it as trauma. And that can look like something like you experienced, but it can also look like something which most of us wouldn't think much of, like, let's say you got lost in the grocery store as a child and it took a minute to get reunited with your mom or your dad. That feeling of being lost, disconnected, unsafe, even if we don't remember it, our body can remember it and can relate it as a traumatic event. I think what you teach a lot of is, recognizing some of that stuff in our bodies and that we've carried with us and how to heal from that. I want to transition a little bit. As you know, I mentioned I wanted to frame up some episodes around the holidays and the extra stress that comes out of the holidays and the, potential anxiety that some of us have. And so in looking at that and thinking about the topics, one of the things I think you try to do is to teach people before you give them tools around how to not have it happen or to manage it. And I'd love it if you could teach us or talk to us a little bit about how stress shows up in our bodies and what that looks like for us and what's going on in their body inside when they go through a stressful situation.
I think it's important to understand firstly that, imagine that we have a bucket for stress in the body and all stress goes into that bucket. So we talk about some things being good stresses like working out, which working out absolutely is great for your body. But if your body already has too much stress, then working out can actually be detrimental. And so the body doesn't differentiate between the good stress and the bad stress. It just knows stress. So it's not like your body's going, oh, they worked out today, we're going to put that in the good pile. And, oh, they set that boundary and it was really uncomfortable and they felt like, they were going into fight or flight, but that was a good thing. So we're going to put it in the good bucket. It just has one bucket. And throughout our life, most people have been putting stuff into that bucket, but never actually taking anything out, never actually dealing with anything in that bucket. So what people don't realize is this stress accumulates over a lifetime until it gets to a point where it's overflowing. And this is where we feel like, we have the mental breakdown or we just erupt with anger and we feel like our emotions are controlling us and we're not controlling our emotions. And it's because we can only hold so much before it does start to overflow, just like any trash can. And I think the holidays are a prime time for these things to come flowing out, especially after the last couple of years that we've had and, all of the new challenges that we've all been hit with, because there's not a lot of tools or resources out there around here's how you can navigate these situations to not add to the bucket, or here's how you can start emptying out the bucket to create more space for you. So when the bucket is full, or we have very little space at the top of the bucket, we have less resilience to deal with curveballs and things that life may throw at us. And then we also bring all of our past experiences into that one moment. So if you're ever at the store and there's a mom freaking out at the cashier or something like that, right? Or there's a situation where somebody's emotions seem over the top for the situation that they're in, it's because their nervous system is carrying and bringing all those past experiences, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years worth of stress and emotion into that one situation. And so I always tell people that our emotions in the moment, especially the really intense ones, aren't always the absolute truth. And most people think that the brain tells the body what to do, but the body also communicates with the brain. And what we know is that if we look at the way that the nerves run, 80% of the body-brain communication is body to brain, and only 20% is brain to body.
Wow. I would have never thought that.
Right?
Right.
And it's crazy. But what happens is, let's say you're in a situation where your heart starts beating faster. Maybe you had that extra cup of coffee that day. Your heart starts beating faster. Your brain which is mostly emotional, right? It's a little bit logic. It's like 4% logic and reason, 96% emotional and past experiences. What it does is it says, my heart is racing right now. What's going on? Why am I having this circumstance? We go out during the holidays and somebody cuts us off in traffic and now we feel unsafe. And, we're like laying on the horn and shouting obscenities out the window or whatever it is, right? In that moment, it's not that person cutting us off that's causing the stress. It's that our nervous system is triggered into that fight or flight response. And then our logical brain attempts to take over and says, what or who is causing me to feel this way inside? And we blame it on that thing. But we don't say, oh, my nervous system is already carrying all of this stress from the past. And this person cutting me off kind of triggered that fight or flight to happen. Instead, we go, it's that person's fault. That person is the reason. It's the holidays. It's that my husband didn't take out the garbage. It's this, right? And we blame it on something external when really, if we do the internal work, we have so much more capacity to hold what happens. I have a 4.5-month-old son, and I did a lot of nervous system work while I was pregnant with him because I knew that, I'm going to have a newborn. That in itself is going to create challenges. I'm going to have, less sleep, all these things going on. And I still want to be present and intentional about what I do and say. I want to be able to manage my emotions because we also know that like kids are hypersensitive to their parents' emotions, right? They're very intuitive in that way. And so if I'm stressed out, then it makes him more stressed out and fussy. And people keep saying like, you have the chillest baby ever. And like, you're navigating this transition into motherhood so well. And you're so calm and you're so intentional. And I'm like, it's because I know in the moments when he does fuss, he's got 6 teeth coming in right now. So there's some fussy moments, right? But because I can regulate myself and remind my nervous system, the bear is not attacking us. It's okay. We're going to take a deep breath. He comes out of his fussiness and his, teething frenzies faster and easier than if I was getting all flustered and like, why won't you stop crying? And like freaking out in that way.
So how do you recognize when you're sort of overreacting, right? In that moment in traffic and you have that, like, you want a road rage incident when it was like big deal that they cut me off. Like it was no big deal, but you make it more than that. And then, so how do you recognize and kind of stop yourself in that moment and take an inventory? Is this level of reaction worth this situation? I mean, I don't know how to put it, but that's what I'm thinking. Like, how do you really notice if you're kind of over the top in the situation? How do you check in?
Yeah. So, I mean, initially it's going to be a lot harder to recognize in the moment because we are repeating a pattern of reacting in the moment, but it'll be really easy after. And this is why like daily reflection can be so important. One of the reasons also that we overreact or that we become so reactive in situations is because we tend to be very self-referential, which means everything that happens, we blame us, right? And I'm sure we've all heard the stories or seen the memes, like, how do you know that person in traffic isn't on the way to visit like a dying loved one? And it's not like they cut you off thinking, oh, I'm going to ruin this person's day, right? They're doing it because of something in their world.
Yeah.
And so when we start looking at it from that point of view, and in the moment, you can ask yourself, do I really think this person cut me off to harm me or to do something negative to me? Or could it be that something else is going on in their life? Could it be that they have something going on that I don't know about? Now, it doesn't always excuse their behavior, right? Especially if we almost get into a car accident because of them cutting us off. It doesn't excuse it, but we don't need to make it about us in that situation. Same thing, you walk into a store and you hear 2 people kind of like whisper and giggle on the side. Immediately, what most people do is be like, is there something in my hair? Is there something in my teeth? Like, why are they laughing at me? Right? But when we realize this has nothing to do with me and it could have things to do with them. Coming into the holidays, you might have to deal with some family members who are negative or who make negative comments or, things like that. One of the most common things I hear from people is that they'll bring up their goals or what they're working on in their life or their career or business or whatever. And then a family member will like shoot it down or make snide comments. And what I like to remind people is, and most people don't actually know this, most people have heard the saying that you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, but it's actually, you are kind of the average of everybody in your community, but you also make up their average. And so when you start to make change, you go on that diet and you lose weight, you decide to start a business, you decide to get a higher paying job, you make positive change in your life in some way, you're raising their average. Which, if we think about the comfort zone, you've left your comfort zone in order to do that thing. You've decided to create a new reality for yourself. And when we step out of the comfort zone, we actually go into the panic zone. And that's why it feels so uncomfortable initially. And so when we decide, okay, I'm going to start going to the gym and I know it's going to be uncomfortable because I don't know how to use the equipment or whatever, but I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to breathe through it. I'm going to use these tools that I'm learning. That's one thing. But what we don't realize is that when we make change and we step outside of our comfort zone, we raise the average of the people around us, which means we inadvertently pull them out of their comfort zone. So they just wake up one day in the panic zone and their nervous system, with their lifetime worth of stuff that they likely haven't dealt with, is triggered into a fight or flight response. And so when people make comments like, oh, it must be nice, or, oh yeah, I'm sure you'll stick to the diet this time, or even the ones that like are framed up out of concern, like, are you sure right now is the right time to start a business? A friend of mine started a business and failed, or you've started a business before and it hasn't worked out, or the economy, right? This is actually their nervous system being in fight or flight and them attempting to fight to get back into their own comfort zone. So when we have that information, it doesn't matter what other people say to us because we can remember, A, they're either in fight or flight, or B, if they are making negative comments about us, it's actually a reflection of themselves. Like if you have a family member who just judges everything that you do, or you're tempted to judge other family members, maybe you're the judgy person, judgment of others gives us a temporary reprieve from the shame and the stuff that we feel towards ourselves, right? We tend to be our own biggest critic. And so we use judging other people as a way to escape how we feel about ourselves. And you'll find that the more that you release like your own inner emotional baggage, the more that you regulate your nervous system, heal any trauma that you have, and the more you really start to love yourself, the less judgment you have for other people, because now it doesn't matter.
I love that. I want to pause there for a second and dig just a little bit deeper, because for me personally, I've done a ton of work and I feel like I am non-judgmental, but I do know a few people in my life that are a little judgy. And so when I think about the holidays, that example you gave, it rings a little bit true, because I can definitely think of some people that are watching how things are going to unfold, watching every move you make, that kind of thing. And so I didn't really think about the fact that it's giving them a break from sort of looking inward and just pushing the attention to somewhere else. That makes sense to me. So is the trick there to just remind yourself of that in the moment, or if a comment gets made or there's some sideways glance or whatever, is the trick just reminding yourself that really is about them and it's not about you, and that just learning not to sort of internalize it?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's definitely a piece of it. Starting to remind yourself, okay, it doesn't matter what Aunt Susie says at the Thanksgiving table or on Christmas morning or whatever, because I know that, she doesn't feel great about herself. And so I don't need to take that on. When we start to realize that we don't have to take other people's words and make them our truth, we become extremely liberated. At the same time, it's important that we protect our energy and our goals and our dreams. So I'll tell people all the time, just because somebody's part of your family doesn't mean you have to share with them what you're doing. I have certain family members, and I've done a ton of work and I continue to do a ton of work. I have certain family members that I just won't tell them what my goals are, or I won't tell them what I'm working on in my business or in my life. I won't talk about why we have made some of the decisions that we've made in raising my son or whatever, because some people are committed to misunderstanding you, right? And at the same time, judgment is still energy, deflecting judgment from other people is still energy that we have to use to fortify our armor. And if I just don't have that energy, or I don't want to spend my energy in that way, then I just won't share with those people.
I love that. Thank you for permission there. What I know works for me, I'm going to use the podcast as an example. This isn't something I've been advertising now that I've been doing it 6 months with my family. It's just for that very reason. It's not the same, I guess, mindset work. All the stuff that I focus on is not really where most of my family would spend their time. Not all, but most. So it's just not something I talk about in that circle. And I've been asked, like, why don't you? You should be. They should be your biggest fans. And I feel like what you just said is my answer. It's, I don't want to have to justify anything or explain anything, or this is something I'm loving and I'm excited about. And I just don't want to waste the energy trying to sort of put up the borders around that. So I think what you just said totally resonates with me. So thank you for that.
I think it's interesting too that you say, like, they should be your biggest fans, and sure, they should be. But at the same time, our friends and family tend to see us as who we used to be.
Yes.
Those closest to us as who we used to be. And they don't always have the vision of who we're becoming, especially if they're not ready to do their own stuff. When I started healing and sharing my journey, like, my mom is a beautiful woman. She was an amazing mother as she had the resources to be at that time. And it really triggered her when I started sharing my story of the abuse that happened to me. And her first comment was always, well, if you share this story, people are going to think I'm a bad mother. And I'm like, my story has absolutely nothing to do with you. You weren't there when it was happening. And I'm very clear that I didn't tell anybody what was happening to me. So while there may have been signs that you could have picked up on, even the signs that were happening that seem like common sense today wasn't talked about back then. And so, for a long time, she kind of pushed back about me sharing my story. And I was like, my story helps other people see that it's okay to heal and that it's okay to admit that things happen to them. And I'm not going to stop other people from healing because you're holding on to this shame that you have. That's something that you have to work on. And I can just not share with you what's going on in my life. You can unfollow me on social media because my social media is for business and for helping serve other people. If I want to catch up with you, I'll just give you a call. If I want to share photos of my son's first Halloween, I'll just text them to you. Right. And so I think as a society, we've kind of been sold this, like, your friends and family should be the people that you share this with, but that doesn't always mean that you can. And I think that's an important distinction for people to recognize, especially around the holidays, that it's okay to set boundaries with your family. It's okay to say, you know what? I don't want to spend as much time with you around these holidays because it does zap my energy and I need to protect my energy, especially in the beginning of your healing journey. You will need more time to navigate, right? You will need to protect your nervous system a little bit more in the beginning, where down the track, you might be able to have more of a fortified armor. But if you're still putting your armor together and figuring out where the pieces go, then you can choose to limit your contact with people, even during the holidays, even if it means breaking a family tradition, because you matter.
Yeah, you matter. You matter, and you're not always, I should say and, I want to say and, you're not always the center of the story. So that keeps coming up as a theme. And I think about the conversation you had with your mother as a parent of grown children. I can kind of relate to your mom. And I think it is what we all tend to do. You already established that, but we tend to put ourselves in the middle of the story and make it about us. And so as a mom of grown children, I can see that sort of defense mechanism that pops up sometimes when they have a story or they have an experience and you don't remember it that way, or you feel a little threatened by it. And it's really not about you. It's about what they experienced, factual or not. It's the experience they took away from it. And we have to allow them to have that experience. And the other thing that you said, which again resonated with me as a mom of grown children, was sometimes our family members are not always able to see us as we grow and as we turn into someone else. That's hard with children sometimes because I think you typically remember your children as children, whether that be a teenager or whatever, they're still your children, right? But when they're in their 30s, their 40s, whatever, 20s, 30s, whatever, mine are not 40s yet, but you still sort of see them that way, right? You still expect them to need you for certain things, or you tend to sort of be surprised sometimes when they do certain things as they change into who they're becoming. And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy of who they were and who they're becoming, and trying to balance between those two things. So that's a really good reminder to people, I think. And you'll get to see that as your son gets older, because you're at the beginning stages. But I do think that's our natural tendency. I know one of the things that you talk about is being addicted to stress, something that we're used to, and I guess we sort of look for, which seems a little odd, but I want to hear a little bit more about that and what your position on that is.
Yeah. So it's actually interesting. I was talking to a client the other day who's going through a breakup, and he said, the heart wants what the heart wants. And I said, does the heart want what the heart wants, or does the nervous system look for situations that feel familiar to it? And this is really where the stress addiction piece comes in. So firstly, to understand, every time that we have a thought, that thought causes our body to release a hormone, a chemical that's transferred through the blood. And then that hormone causes us to have a feeling or an emotion. And that feeling and emotion circles back up, causes us to have more thoughts of the same quality. Now, the average person has approximately 60,000 thoughts a day, and the average person, 80% of those thoughts are negative. And so for most of our life, we are stuck in this negative thought cycle. And those negative thoughts cause our body to release our stress hormones, which are cortisol and adrenaline. Now, over time, if you imagine that we have a thermostat, an emotional thermostat in our body, similar to what we have in our house, right? And if you're always setting your thermostat to 70 degrees and you have like a smart thermostat, it might say, do you want this to be the default, right? 70 degrees is the default. If it gets warmer outside, we're going to turn on the air conditioning, drop you back to 70. If it gets colder outside, then we're going to turn on the furnace, bring you back up to 70. Well, it's the same thing with our body. When we're constantly being flooded with stress hormone, eventually the body cells will say, we have more hormone than we have receptors for. And so let's build more receptors so that we can use this hormone. And so over time, you start to shift your emotional thermostat or your default mode to use up all this stress hormone. It's almost like with any addiction, right? The smoker, initially they need one cigarette to get the buzz, or the alcoholic needs one drink to get the buzz. But over time, one becomes two becomes five becomes a whole pack or a whole bottle in order to feel quote unquote normal. And this is what happens in the body. Our body's highly adaptive. If we go to the gym, right, and we start doing bicep curls with 10 pounds, that might be really heavy. Probably is really heavy if you've never been to the gym before. But over time, you keep lifting that 10 pounds, and eventually 10 pounds is going to feel light. And now you need 20 pounds or 15 pounds or whatever it is. And the same thing is true for our hormones. If we're constantly being flooded with more stress hormone than what we would typically need, then over time, our body adjusts to be able to use that stress hormone. And now what's crazy is when that amount of stress hormone becomes normal, it also becomes pleasurable to the body. So if you've ever met somebody, because adrenaline feels good, right? The adrenaline hit feels good. This is why people jump off like cliffs and buildings and do all these crazy adrenaline junkie things, is because they are addicted to the high that comes with adrenaline. So if you've ever met somebody and you're like, I swear this person gets off on drama, I swear this person loves blah, 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 then it's likely at a very unconscious level for them, that's the case. And so when we grow up, like this client that I was talking about before, they grew up with a chaotic childhood. They grew up where mom and dad were always fighting. And so that's what they defined as what a relationship looks like. Even though consciously, the 4% of their brain is like, I want something different, unconsciously, that's not what their normal is. And so, and we were talking about it. I said, if you got into a relationship with somebody who like did their healing work, who like meditated, who took care of their own needs, like their own emotional needs, and you enriched their life. And he was like, that would be so boring. And that's right? Like we tend to characterize it as like, oh, that person's boring, or, oh, that person's too nice, or, oh, there's just no chemistry. There's no passion here, because the nervous system is addicted to the chaos. And so in society, it's like the busier you are, the bigger the badge of honor that you're going to get is. The busier you are, the better of a person you are, the more successful you are, the more chaotic your holidays are, right? Like you have to do all of these things, 50 million things, especially women at the holidays, moms at the holidays. You have to do all these different things in order for this to be a successful Christmas. But meanwhile, you're so stressed out that you can't even connect to the fact that your kids are having fun making a snowman, or like, I'm well aware that my son is going to enjoy the wrapping paper and the boxes this Christmas more than he will the toys. So I don't need to stress myself out about being like, how can I get you like 10 of the absolute best toys? He doesn't care about that. What he's going to care about is that I was present and I was able to play and I was able to smile and connect with him. And when we start to heal our nervous system, we don't have the desire to keep up with the Joneses. We don't have the desire to put on the show externally to make everybody else think that we're happy, or that we have this picture perfect Christmas holiday season, because we are happy. And when we are happy and our nervous system is regulated, then we don't need other people to validate that for us, because we can validate it for ourselves.
So for someone that is used to that a cycle of stress and getting, kind of getting those hits, when they recognize, okay, I'm trying to be more enlightened, I've been working on leveling up and I'm ready to take off the busy badge, I'll call it. Somebody just gave me that on a different interview I did. But you're ready to take off the busy badge and sort of settle into a new norm. What are some of the initial steps somebody can do if they're not really there yet, but they know they want to go there? Like, what are some of those things that they could sort of put in place to start changing that dynamic?
So I think it's really important that we start recognizing like what truly matters. I was talking to somebody last week about redefining what a supermom is. Do you remember that your house was always perfectly clean as a kid? Or do you remember that your mom or dad was present with you? Of your childhood, where are your favorite memories? Oh, there was never a piece of dirt on our kitchen floor. Or me and my mom baked Christmas cookies and we made this giant mess, but my mom looked so funny. She had like flour all over her face, but we got to decorate these cookies and it just felt so good to be there. Right. And so if you start thinking back to your own childhood, like what were your favorite memories? What were the things that genuinely mattered to you back then? What were the things that you wished you had more of? Do you wish you had more snow days where your mom would go outside and make snowmen with you, or snow angels or whatever? Do you wish that you got to wrap the presents with your mom instead of, oh, all the presents were perfectly wrapped, right? But you got that connection experience, or that things look perfect. And when we start to reflect on that, then we can see, okay, well, if that was what was most important for me, then that's probably what's most important for my own kids. And bring them in on the conversation. What is most important for you? What are your favorite memories from our past Christmases? And listen to what they say, because they'll tell you.
Yeah.
They'll tell you the things that they most enjoyed. And that's where you can put your time and energy, right? Instead of like everything needing to be perfect and you not being present or not enjoying what's going on because you're so focused on making everything perfect. Rather, what are the things that they're saying? And then I think it's also important to just like literally breathe. one of the fastest ways that we can pull ourselves out of like the fight or flight mode that comes with the stress addiction and into a place where we can be present and we can start to regulate our nervous system is through our breath. And there's a breath technique called the physiological sigh, or exhale emphasized breathing, or you can just call it whatever you want. But you basically take a double inhale and then you exhale out your mouth and just let it go. And just do a couple rounds of those anytime you feel like that old judgment of yourself coming up, right? And ask yourself if you're like, oh, I didn't put up 5 Christmas trees this year, or that present isn't perfectly wrapped, or, I didn't do this thing that I normally do. Ask yourself, when you start to judge yourself, like, where is this truly coming from? Whose voice is it in your head? When I got pregnant, I decided to change my calendar so that no clients could book in with me before 10 a.m. And that way I could just have my morning to do a workout, which obviously was a bit slower because I was pregnant, to make sure I was getting some good food so that I could meditate and do the work on me that I wanted to do for when my son arrived. And I was hit with like this tsunami of like guilt and shame. And there was this voice in my head like, oh, how dare you not let clients book in before 10? Like, that's so lazy. That's not what successful entrepreneurs do. And I was like, wait a second, like, where is this voice coming from? Because it's my business. I started my business so that I could have the freedom that I wanted. And I want to be able to do things for myself. So like, where is this coming from? And my dad, my stepdad technically, but my dad, he growing up was all about work ethic. And if you weren't working by 7, you'd wasted half the day, right? And I was like, is that a belief that needs to be true for me? Like, I know this was pounded into me growing up, but do I have to perpetuate this cycle? Or, like, my dad always had to be busy doing something. I would have loved more time just to like sit and hang out or have conversations with him, rather than him being like, I got to fix this and this needs to be done. And, creating a honey-do list or creating projects just to always be busy, which, by the way, is also a sign of stress addiction. If you can't just sit still and be present or play games or like cuddle and watch TV with your kids or your significant other, that's a sign of stress addiction. And so I was able to ask myself, okay, where is this coming from? And does this belief need to be true for me? So as we come into the holiday season, if you're like, I have to have 20 people coming over for Thanksgiving, I have to do it all alone. When I first met my husband, my mother-in-law, this was her. I have to cook for all 14 people all by myself. And eventually, as I became part of the family, I was like, I'm going to place myself in the most inconvenient spot in the kitchen for you so that you have help, because I don't want you to have to cook for all of us by yourself. We're all sitting in another room on the completely other end of the house and you're like frantic in the kitchen. And now after a couple Christmases and Thanksgiving, she's like, it's actually really nice having somebody to like talk with and just be in the kitchen with. And I said, because you don't have to do it alone. Like, you can ask for help. You don't have to, if you have multiple people coming for dinner, ask them to bring a dish. It's okay. And if that voice of judgment kicks up for you, ask yourself, where is this coming from? Whose voice is this actually? And that from there, we can start to heal and address and rewire those belief systems.
I love the advice to ask your children. Many of us have grown children now, but it's the same thing, right? As we look to do things for our grandchildren or our larger family, it's actually probably a better exercise because you have grown children that you can look to and say, what parts of everything did you enjoy most or connect with most, and then reinforce those. So that was really good advice. And then also, you kind of gave us a nice dovetail into another topic, which is around slowing down and meditation, which I know you highly recommend. But you said for somebody that, can't slow down, can't stop, they always have to have a list, they always have to kind of keep things going. Their mind's always racing on the next thing. Truthfully, that's a lot of people in this group. And I think for several of us, I've heard feedback, and myself included, I've gotten a little bit better at it, but meditation is hard. Slowing down your thoughts and being able to just be quiet and reflect and kind of shut the brain off, it's a challenge. So talk to us a little bit about that, because I know that's something you highly recommend, especially for people like that. So what can you tell us? Give us the secrets.
If I had $1 for every time somebody said, "Oh, I know meditation's good, but it's just not for me. I can't do it." I would that would be my 7-figure business in itself. So I think there's a misconception that meditation is like your mind has to be blank. It's never going to wander, but that's actually that couldn't be further from the truth. It's called a meditation practice because every day is going to be different. I've been meditating for years, and I still have days where my thoughts are like flying all over the place. And I have some days where I just drop in really easily. And so meditation is really about being present enough to notice where the mind goes. And so you might notice that your mind always pulls you to a worst case scenario. Well, that's actually a sign that your nervous system is in fight or flight, because it's attempting to protect you by deciding all the possible things that could go wrong. So you can have contingency plans on contingency plans, right? But does that serve you? And so when you start to just pay attention to, oh, this is where my thoughts are going. Okay. Does this thought serve me? Does it serve me to think that I have to do this family tradition because it's a tradition, even though I don't like it, even though, it's something that I don't want to do anymore? My family, my mom and dad, my brothers, the way that we have shown love my entire life is through sarcasm and making jokes at other people's expenses. And somebody always gets hurt. And usually it's all coming at me, right? Because I'm like the black sheep of the family. And then I get upset, or my brother gets upset. And then it creates this whole family fight. And then there's some gaslighting, like the don't be so sensitive. And I was meditating one day when I was pregnant, and I was like, I don't want to normalize this for my son. That just kind of came to me. I was reflecting on my dad had made a comment that I was really struggling with while I was pregnant. And my mind kept going there during meditation. And I was like, this is like my body's way of telling me like that pattern isn't okay. And so even though it's like how my family is, right? I can say like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm like opting out. I'm unsubscribing from this old family pattern. And so it's important to realize, like, to sit and reflect and say, where is this coming from? If a family tradition, especially around the holidays, doesn't feel good to you, then you're not going to show up as your best self. If it's like anxiety inducing weeks or months in advance, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do this, and it keeps coming up in your meditation, if your mind keeps going there, use that as a sign that your body is trying to tell you that things need to change. Either you need to set the boundary, you need to not be involved with it, or you need to tell people like, hey, we're doing it differently this year. Traditions are allowed to evolve and grow, just like we are. The other thing with meditation is, if you're new, if you find that it's difficult, don't try and sit down for like an hour. Literally, you can do 2 minutes or 5 minutes of meditation and being fully present, and get more out of that than attempting to force yourself to sit there for 20 minutes and then beating yourself up, because that self-judgment, that self-criticism is just another way to keep you in stress addiction. So if you just sit for 5 minutes and say, okay, for 5 minutes, I'm just going to take nice deep breaths, and I'm going to notice, observe where my thoughts go. And then when those thoughts come up, you can say, oh, that's an interesting one. Does this serve me? Is this helping me move forward? What's the purpose of me having this thought? What would my life be like if I didn't have this thought or this emotion or this anxiety about this thing anymore? And then that's where we can really start to get the biggest clues about the next piece of the healing journey to work on, is when we actually listen to ourselves. And that's really what meditation is it's listening to ourselves.
And with no judgment. You didn't say it, but you talked it through. It's looking at that stuff with curiosity and not judgment. And so I think that's important because, again, back to the negative thoughts, I think our natural tendencies is to be like, oh, I'm having that thought again. Why am I going there or whatever? But instead, taking it and sort of looking at it and saying, well, why? Why am I having that thought again? And does it serve me? And is there something else I can think about it? Yeah, I think that having that perspective and that curiosity factor really helps change the dynamic of it.
Yeah. And with any healing journey, like whether you're doing meditation, journaling, other work, it's important to know that you're not broken and you don't need fixing. And if that thought comes up of like, I need fixing, I'm so broken, that's actually a judgment. And what that does is it takes the wound or the piece of you that wants and needs to be healed, and it drives it deeper into the unconscious mind where now it becomes harder to access. So if instead we say, okay, I'm going to meditate with the intention to accept or to understand myself more fully, right? Like we take those skeletons out of the closet, invite them to a tea party, because that's where we tend to, especially around the holidays, like, oh, I don't want people to find this out. I got to shove this skeleton back. Whereas if I'm friends with the skeleton and I've accepted him or her, right? If I'm comfortable with this piece of me, with my mistakes, my past failures, quote unquote, then it doesn't matter what anybody else has to say because it's not my truth. And so somebody can sit here and say like, oh, I can't believe you did X, Y, and Z. And I say, you know what? It was part of my learning journey. It was part of my journey to become who I am today. And I wouldn't change it for anything. And when you have that power within yourself, nobody can take your energy and nobody's like snide comments or whatever will have an impact on you because you have fully accepted yourself and you're not looking for somebody else to do it for you.
I love that. I can't agree with it more. And I think it's important to just say that it's going to be scary. It's going to be hard to do at first, but even taking some baby steps there with setting boundaries, changing up something that you don't want to do anymore, whether it be because you can't afford it or you don't have the time for it or it's just not a priority for you. Just say it and put that out there. And whether it, might get a little backlash or not, but take that step because you get to choose what's right for you and what works for you and your family, your immediate concerns there. So I think that's important and that's really good advice.
Yeah. I'll just say this healing journey and this like self-regulation journey, it's going to be the cha-cha. Like you're not just going to move forward consistently. There's going to be times where you fall back into old patterns and you'll be tempted to judge yourself and just remind yourself, like, I'm human. What happened? How did I get triggered back here? And then carry on your way. So there will be some steps backwards, but there will be more steps forward. And that's ultimately what matters.
I think that's so important. People forget that. They think, like, I said this at the beginning, right? Our journeys are always such a curvy path. And it does involve a cha-cha, no matter whether it's you're working on a weight loss journey or you're working on your own inner dialogue and you're trying to really change how you think and how you cut off those limiting beliefs, any of it. None of it is like a clear, okay, on this day I stopped doing all that. It just doesn't happen like that. It goes back and forth. You get better, but you'll have some slippage where you kind of fall back into patterns and you just have to keep reinforcing through practice, through just ongoing practice to get to a better place. This has been so fantastic, and I appreciate all of the insight you shared with us. Is there anything we didn't hit on that you'd like to leave the group with?
I would say probably the biggest reminder, especially after the last couple of years, especially with talk of where the economy is at and everything, is that you don't have to keep up with anybody this holiday season. It is better for you to be present and able to connect with people than for you to keep up with the Joneses or to present that perfect front. And that's the piece that the people who matter the most in your life are going to remember, is the times of connection and love and presence as in not like the boxes to unwrap, but you being present as opposed to everything looking perfect and you being stressed out and chaotic. So whatever you have to do this holiday season to find those moments of being present and being able to connect, soak up as many of those as you can.
And I also think you may find out that you set the path for other people. You being able to push back and change a tradition or say, we're not buying for everybody this year. Let's do a swap or let's pick a name or whatever the situation is. I think you may find that there's others that are feeling the same way, but you being the one brave enough to do it may lead the path to additional change, which is fantastic. Thank you so much. I am going to, of course, put all your links in the show notes for everybody so they can get in touch with you. You're doing some great work. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. And congratulations again on your son, and enjoy this year of firsts. I think you're going to have a fabulous time.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. It's been awesome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.